Hello, lovely humans. All right, there's a lot of misunderstanding about how capitalism works and how our economic system works in general. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how the government works, why we have government, and honestly, even why we have capitalism. This is an area that I'm really passionate about. I've done a lot of research and I've read a lot. I am always really motivated to understand how big systems function and also how systems get built and change over time. So let's learn about these things together, okay? I'm gonna do a series of videos on free markets, on the principles of capitalism, on just general economic principles, on government, fundamental issues with government. If you have a particular question that falls under this topic, or if there are other STEM topics you want to talk about, please let me know and let's learn about them together, okay? Before we dig into the details, including the mathematics behind some of these economic principles, let's talk about free markets at a high level. The first thing that I want you to understand is that a free market is not capitalism, and capitalism is not a free market. A free market refers to a system in which there are very few barriers to buying and selling goods and services. Capitalism is an economic system that generally refers to the production and sales of goods and services. So free markets are how things get exchanged, and capitalism is kind of like a much more broad economic principle. The second thing I want you to understand about economics is that it is what I call a squishy science. So in physics, biology, chemistry, the hard sciences, it is a very rigorous process to have a hypothesis that is refutable or supportable, and then you go about with very specific parameters. You box your experiment very intentionally, and you set about to find evidence that refutes or support that. Economics, on the other hand, uses mathematics to understand the system of the exchange of goods and services. So it makes a lot of assumptions. A lot of the hypotheses of economic principles are not refutable, which means they cannot be necessarily called a theory, because if you can't refute them, you also can't prove that they are correct. Full stop. So take that with a grain of salt. Economics is a squishy science, or sometimes it's called a soft science. It's not to say that there aren't useful things in there. However, we have to understand that when we're talking about economic systems, that it is a lot different than when we talk about scientific theories like gravity. Okay? Within free markets, there are two big things that we need to understand about free markets. Number one, free markets do not account for externalities. Externalities are things like pollution, byproducts of production, of sales, of distribution that are not directly affecting how that good gets produced or sold. They are things that get passed on to the unsuspecting neighbors. Another good example would be around factory farms. There's a lot of sludge that's produced that goes into the water, and it pollutes the water and contaminates the water, and the companies that own factory farms used to be not responsible for that. And so even though the neighboring people are getting poisoned without government regulation, the companies were not incentivized to do anything about it, and the citizens had no recourse. Okay? Externalities can also mean things like maybe a company is selling food that they try to make the food as cheap as possible so that people will go and buy it over their competitors, and in the process of making that food cheap, let's say they add microplastics, And slowly over time, these microplastics poison their consumers. But because it happens very slowly over time, the consumers don't know. They don't know where it's coming from. They are getting sick, but it's not a direct correlation with a particular food source or direct correlation with a particular good that they are consuming. And so that is an externality that the free market fails to account for. And that is a big problem. And that feeds into the second big thing that we have to understand about free markets, which is that without government regulation, a free market will always devolve into a monopoly. And a monopoly is not a free market. Okay? So the first one, not being able to account for externalities, and the second one, not being able to self-regulate, to devolve into a monopoly, means that we absolutely require governments. Government and free markets are a match made in heaven. You can't have a free market without government regulation. Full stop. All economists will agree on this point. If you are curious, Alan Greenspan talks a lot about this in his autobiography. There's a lot of fluff in there, but it is a very good book if you want to understand the ways in which conservative libertarian economists think about the markets. So he talks a lot about how democracy is really necessary for capitalism to function because there has to be a pressure release valve for consumers, and also there has to be regulation from the government to prevent a monopoly. One of the big problems we have right now is that we don't actually have a free market system. When we talk about companies that are too big to fail, that is not a free market. That is not consumer choice. The grocery store industry is a very good example of this. In the last couple of years, I think it's Albertsons and Safeway, Kroger and Safeway that wanted to merge. And within Washington, there are, those are two of the big national grocery chains. And within Washington, there's not enough competition. If that merger went through, there's not enough competition for consumers to have a choice of a different grocery store. There are the city where I'm from, which is north of Seattle, the closest grocery store is, there's two grocery stores kind of within that area. And if the two merged, there would be one grocery store. That is not a free market. And so under Lina Khan, the Washington State Attorney General sued to block that merger because it would negatively impact consumers. And that is why we rely on the government to regulate the free market, because the free market will not self-regulate. When you have industries where you have monopolies that are too big to fail, that is a problem because consumers don't have choice. Those companies can charge whatever prices they want. They can add all of these surplus fees on top of the actual cost to them. So it's not even about them making profit at this point. It's about them being able to reap in as much profit as they can to the detriment of the consumer. Government is required to prevent a free market from devolving into a monopoly. And what has happened since the 1980s, since Reagan, is that the Republicans have deregulated the economy. There is an argument to be made about, okay, like sometimes regulation is difficult. I ran a business. It is very, very hard, especially when you're running a business by yourself, to deal with all of the regulation. I get it. And at the same time, we absolutely need consumer protections to protect us from externalities, because corporations and companies will not do that on their own. And we also, what Republicans have done, is they have also relaxed the regulations around monopolizations. And so if you look at pretty much any industry in our society, you will find severe monopolization across pretty much every sector, across food distribution, across manufacturing, across electronics, across, pretty much everything. You name it, it's probably got a monopoly. And what we are also seeing is with companies like Amazon is they are starting to have monopolies across multiple industries. And that is bad for the consumer because they can do whatever they want and we have no alternatives. One argument that I will bring up, you're like, well, why can't another company just start up? Okay, well, let's look at what happens in the startup industry. So WeWork, what WeWork did in the startup industry, WeWork is a co-working startup. So if you own a small business like I do, and when I was running it full time, I had a rented office with some friends in a co-working space in Seattle. And what WeWork did was they came in and they tried to steal everybody by offering them, oh, there's my robot vacuum. They tried to steal everybody, one sec. Okay, robot vacuum on pause while I finish this video. Okay, so WeWork came in and they tried to steal all of the clients from the co-working space by undercutting the prices. So they were like, come to WeWork because we're super cheap. So they did that for long enough to put all of these other co-working spaces out of business. And when that happened, when WeWork was the only one left standing, they jacked up the prices. And what can you do at that point as a consumer? You have no other options. They made it very expensive and very difficult for anybody else to operate in that space. And now when you go and look around at co-working spaces, there's not a lot of options. So monopolies are very bad, and they make it very difficult for any competitors to enter the market because they will temporarily lower their prices, eat the cost until the competition goes out of business, and then they jack up the prices again. And because they have so much money and they control most of the market, they can do that. And that is bad for the consumer. It is not a free market. And if that company, so there we go. Well, I'll end it there. I hope that is helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions about this. I think that this kind of discourse is really, really important. And I want you to remember that knowledge is power. And if there are people that are telling you that they have all the information and that you don't need to go and look it up, or if they're telling you to trust them, or if they're telling you that you don't need an education because like they got your back, do your own research. And when I say do your own research, I truly mean like go and look at original sources. Go and look at textbooks written by people that don't have a stake in the game, okay? Be skeptical, be critical. Knowledge is power. And I really believe that we all want to live in a system where we can build good lives for ourselves, for our kids, for our community. I really believe that we all want to build better systems, right? Like that's why we care about this shit. But to do that, we truly have to understand how these systems function. And also we have to understand the historical context of where they started, what they've gone through, and where they are at now, in order to understand how to make effective decisions for building better systems. All right. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.